will ring on the door any second now, I assume.
So that gives me an opportunity to do a 1 second advert. This is the apps I make. Go buy binary.com. How many of you used GCD? Oh, quite a few. So I preach you to the converted mostly, but no problem. It says here, Grand Central Dispatch comprises apps, features, runtime library, system enhancement, blah, 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 blah. It's a real mouthful. What's more, it's quite scary when you read something like this. For in fact, that's a really good part of the libraries that have been added to Objective-C, well, to iOS and OS 10 recently. The GCD reference that this comes from is actually really good, but it's a little bit weighty to read. GCD is not an Objective-C API. It's a C API. But why do we need it? Well, I don't know if any of you used NS Operation Queue or those kind of features and stuff. Some people. And probably you can perfectly well do a lot of the stuff that you would do with the Grand Central Dispatch with an NS Operation Queue or something like that. For me, it's a much more unwieldy way to do it. You're creating a lot of Objective-C objects, and particularly if you're concerned about performance, it's not ideal. Also, I just don't like the API so much. And in fact, NS Operation Queue is these days built on top of Grand Central Dispatch. So going directly to Grand Central Dispatch is both nicer aesthetically, although that's a matter of taste, but also it's more sort of going directly down to what's underneath. Grand Central Dispatch is, I think it's quite elegant. You have to beware if you're targeting iOS 4 or Mac Snow Leopard, which I guess most of you aren't these days, but if you were, then don't bother because they doesn't work in those systems. Okay. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just give a couple of examples of things that I've done with GCD lately. I haven't used all the features of GCD by any means. I've just been using a few things, but for the things that I needed to do, it was really handy. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is something that probably everybody does, and maybe not everybody knows how to do it properly, or the modern way of doing it. And that is having singletons. Now, Apple actually has many singletons. If you talk about NS application, shared application, or NS workspace, shared a workspace, or UI application, or whatever. Those are all singleton objects. And it's very easy to have a bit of code that looks something like this when you want a singleton. So here I am, I want a thing, I call thing instance, or whatever you want to call it, shared instance, shared thing, or there are different conventions. But here I'm saying, if I don't have my thing, so I've got a static thing up here, it's just inside this, it's just visible inside this file. And if it's null, which it will be because it's declared static when it starts, then I'm going to allocate it. What's wrong with this code? Anyone?
It's not exactly thread safe.
It's not exactly thread safe. Precisely. Couldn't have put it better myself. So clearly, thing can be being allocated in one thread and can still be returning null. So you can get it double allocated. I mean, it doesn't turn out well necessarily. There are other ways around it. You can start putting synchronized blocks around the whole condition and things like this. But actually, a really good way to fix this is with Grand Central Dispatch. And it's actually very, very simple. You just use this dispatch once, and then the operating system, the library, will ensure that that can only ever be executed once. And it looks at this variable thread here to determine whether that has been done or not. It's totally thread safe and will almost always work. I only say almost because there's a bit of a funny case. This week, in fact, I had some code where I could prove when I was running my test that this was executing twice. What the hell is going on here? How can that possibly be happening? And it turned out that I actually had the class that it was in included in my iOS app bundle, which was linked into the tests, and also compiled into the tests. So it was linked in, that class was linked in twice, and it was running in both separate places it was linked. So that's probably the only case it can run twice, I don't know. But, so that's a very useful thing. If you're using singletons, you should be using that kind of code these days, because it's just so simple, and you can say, yes, we're thread safe. Next thing I have found useful, queues. Now this is in fact them queuing in Covent Garden in London for the iPhone 5. Madness, I call it. But anyway, they stayed there all night and out in the rain and whatever. But of course, we sometimes need a queue of things and to do operations in order or maybe concurrently. And Grand Central Dispatch provides you with queues, and they're very, very simple to use. We have, I've used something like this, and here is my queue. I'm actually inside this particular class that I've got. I need a queue that I'm going to add bits of work to, and this is how I create it. That's it. Dispatch queue create. In fact, this parameter here you can set to create a concurrent queue, but I'm just passing it null. It creates a serial queue. So each item has to be complete before the next item will execute. But if you create a concurrent queue, GCD will manage your threads for you. It has a thread pool. It just does all the stuff for you. So how would you use that queue? Well, here is my class. Right, we have our queue for buying an iPhone 5, and I've done something special here, and I'll tell you why in a second. But really the main bit of the work is dispatch async, and we're going to call buy phone. Only one person can be buying phone at any one time. When this returns from buy phone, the next buy phone will be activated. Probably you'd have some sort of parameters here to tell you, for each job, because each job will be different. So this will just do the same job over and over again. But anyway, whatever parameters you pass in here, you can pass through to the queue. No problem. Okay, one little thing I've done here. I've made this weak reference to self here. Because in fact, in what I was doing, it could happen that I just got bored and went home and didn't want the iPhone 5. So in Objective-C terms, if I went out of scope and got collected by ARC or whatever, then so it could happen that an object that has a job in the queue has gone away. And in this case, I'm preventing anything bad happening here. So when you make a weak reference, when you call buy phone on it, it'll be null by that point, and nothing happens. So that just protects in case self, so this particular instance has gone away by the time the thing is executing. You might need something like that. We found it helpful. Okay, so that's my simple queue for buying a phone. In fact, I'm just going to go a little bit further than that and try and explain something a bit more complicated that I was trying to do with Grand Central Dispatch. Because what we had was an API that was asynchronous, and we wanted to sort of make it into have a synchronous queue executing the API. So the API would call us back, and it's a bit like this. So here is our queue over here to buy the iPhone, and here is the jobs are executing via another door. You see the iPhone 5, it's very big here, doesn't fit in the pocket. The idea here is that this is the incoming job, and this is going to return immediately. So this sort of gatekeeper here is immediately returning and ready for someone else to enter. But he doesn't know when to let the next person in until this guy over here knows that he's left, because only one person at a time should be in here. So this is, and I'll explain it with a diagram, a sort of Objective-C diagram, because this is kind of a bit of a fake analogy. But, you know, it's all good fun. So what we're saying is only one person can be buying a phone at any one time. Okay, so in terms of data, in terms of the app, we've got a queue, and here's our API. It's an asynchronous API. As soon as we request, it returns. And then when it's finished doing whatever it's doing, it's going to call us back. Okay. Now, the thing is, what we wanted is only one thing to be done at any one time. So as soon as we send this request, it returns. But we want to wait here until the mystery API has called us back before we send the next request. So that's before we let the queue execute the next thing. So we have to do an additional thing here. And the technology we're going to use for that is semaphores. Has anyone ever used semaphores?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Computer science stuff. Did it at college. Semaphores are very, very, very simple. And the basic idea of a semaphore is that you would have a resource, and it would know how many of those resources you have. And when anyone wants to use a resource, it would call into the semaphore and say, oh, I'm using one. And if there was two resources, two people were going, I'm using one, and the resource number available would be decremented down to 0. And the next one is saying, oh no, I can't have one, because they're all being used. So that one would wait, and then when those other guys had finished using the resource, they would signal back, and this waiting guy could then use the resource. So that's the basic idea of semaphores. But what we're going to do now is we're going to just wait over here until we get a callback. Now this callback's on another thread. It doesn't matter because GCD is all going to take care of all that for us. So when we get this callback, we're going to set a signal up here saying, okay, we're done, and this wait is going to return. I've got some code. Now for this I use my little interlock class, and really all it does is make a semaphore here, and we actually just have wait and signal. And when we wait, so we're going to call wait directly after we've called the API. And then this is going to wait for something to tell it that it's okay, that it can return. And one just little feature to mention here, it's got a timeout. And that's really helpful to us because sometimes APIs just don't return. And we want to handle that error in a sensible way. We've got a signal as well here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass an instance of this class through the API. And we're going to do that using the user data feature of this particular API. And many APIs have this kind of feature where they can pass maybe a delegate or a user data or something. And this is how we use it. So we're going to send what I call an interlock request. So we're going to send this request. It's going to send out to my mystery API, and when we're going to just wait, and then at some time another thread is going to call this. There was a successful request, and the API has come back, and then we're going to send a signal so that this is going to return. And if we get this within 5 seconds that I set it to, result is going to be a number that's not 0, so it's just going to exit out of here. And then the next thing in my queue will be able to be done. So this is how I've used semaphores to actually make, and a queue, to make a asynchronous API into something that I know is going to happen in a serial fashion, which just happened to be something I needed to do. You'll probably come across other patterns and things that it may be useful for, but that was just useful for me. GCD actually has a bunch of stuff in it. Grant use barriers, dispatches. I'm not going to talk about any of those. But it's probably really useful, all those other things as well. But just the simple things of semaphores, queues, and dispatch once for singletons have been actually really useful for me. Any questions? We're all going to use use GCD.
By the way, in which version of the iOS it appeared? Like just
After 5, so it's from 5 onwards.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really good that really cool that they built it into iOS because it's good stuff.
Are you sure?
It's in iOS 4.
We would guess. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for
Do you think it's in iOS 4 versions later than 4 point some? I know it's not in early versions of iOS 4.
It could be.
Wasn't in
Okay.
4.0.
We will Google that.
We can Google that because now you questioned it. I'm not 100% certain.
Then my next question would be, what is the good singleton pattern for the pre-GCD?
You can use synchronized. I've seen. Presumably, you can use the synchronized construct or one of it similar. So you just need a synchronized code block. But I think it's a little bit heavier if you do that. So at least you know that no two things are in that code block at once. I'm not sure, but I do know that the GCD implementation is really efficient. So that dispatch once only has to do one additional test, basically, to do that than it would have otherwise had to do. So it's really fast, apparently. I don't know how they did it, but they did. Yeah. Okay. Nothing else. I shall leave the stage. And the next, I think you would like to talk about. Do I get your name right?
Yoshioka.
We'll have a chat, talk about building a Twitter.
Yes.
Right, okay, brilliant. Whenever you're ready. Thanks a lot.